there's a question about what is morality. And they might say, well, is morality a subjective thing? Is it an objective thing? Is it a relative thing? And one of the things you hear commonly, but if it's even a thing, right? So then some might go into that direction. Assuming it's a thing, you'll commonly hear in our culture that, well, morality is just relative. You'll hear that at the university. So you're going to essentially do an elimination process. Say how to make the case that morality is subjective. There's a number of ways to do that. You could do that. This one would be, let's look at the other option and then narrow it down. Moral relativism specifically, there's a few of the basic premises. That no objective standard of morality exists. That a particular moral standards are determined by agreement within a society or a group. A group could be like a religion. And so people who are a part of that religion, this is how they think. Or morality is a mere human construct, which is necessary for order within human civilization. Here's an argument on how someone might make the case for relative morality. They say the standard of right and wrong differs between cultures. And all you got to do is go around the world and you'll see some different concepts about morality, and so and it's in different cultures. So, okay, we can see where that comes from. Well, second, people learn their standard of morality from their culture. Well, if the standards of morality are different, and people just learn it based on the culture, and if you learn it from your culture, well then therefore no objective moral standard exists. Because it's culturally determined. What's making things right and wrong is simply the fact aligned with or not aligned with the culture. That's what determines your the moral value of any action. Not what you do, not what actually occurred. You see that distinction? It's like, well, does it align with the cultural view? Well, then it's fine. Does it not? Is it contrary to the cultural view? Then it's not. Like, so it has nothing to do with what was actually transpiring, is what that amounts to. In light of this, and this next one, due to the cultures having different moral standards, they say no actual moral norms exist. So normative moral relativism would go so far as to say an action is right or wrong based on its conformity or lack of conformity to the moral code of a particular society. Again, having nothing to do with what actually happened and the moral value of the action itself. So we're going to get into that as we start to look at some problems. So I'm going to do an assessment of moral relativism here. I've got 6 things we're going to talk about in evaluating this position of moral relativism. First one is what I just mentioned. Nothing about the action itself makes it right or wrong. It's simply, well, does it fit the culture or not? Well, you could identify many things that we would think are not good and shouldn't be happening that might take place in another culture. And you'd say, if you're a relativist, you have to say, well, that's fine, because that's what's right and wrong for them, and this is what's right and wrong for us. You say, okay, so what you're saying, all that matters is is basically location. So morality is subject to location. So if I happen to be in this country, well, I can't do certain things. Now, if I go over there, well, I can. If I'm in a particular religion, then I have these boundaries on what I can and can't do as far as what's right and wrong. But if I'm in a different religion, well, that might be different. And point being, again, it has nothing to do with what you're doing. You say, wait a minute. Are you saying that if a particular culture said it's not a big deal to rape a child, then that's the way it is there because the action, there's nothing right or wrong about the action itself? Is that what you're saying? And then they can say, well, nobody. Well, let's assume nobody now, but maybe in the past that's happened and been thought as no big deal. And you think, so that was fine then? No, of course, nobody thinks this. You're not thinking, oh yeah, this is fine. And you think, okay, so there's something about this action itself. And then there's murder. And then there's, run the list. of things. You say, okay, no one's thinking that. Then why are we talking like this? Why are you saying this as though there's nothing about the action that has a moral value? All right, on the second problem. First of all, if you notice the argument, we said, they're like, oh, these cultures disagree, they have different views. Well, disagreement is irrelevant. So the fact that disagreement exists over an issue does not mean that there is not an actual truth about the matter. It doesn't mean that no one is mistaken. Well, they differ, so therefore I'm going to reach the conclusion no one's mistaken about it? Maybe they differ because somebody's mistaken. How about that possibility? So, quote here for you, just to hear. But different cultures differ over the shape of the earth and the cosmos. But the mere fact that cultures differ, nothing from that follows about whether the earth has a shape or whether the shape can be known. Or whether the earth is the center of the universe or not. Okay, maybe we have different views on that. Or the earth, the earth is flat, the earth is round. Okay, over the course of history. Well, yeah, there has been differing views. What does that mean? Well, doesn't mean that there's not an answer, because they differ. So why would the fact that there's disagreement here, why would that mean that there's not an actual answer? Just because we're talking about morality. The next one. Nothing can be identified as evil. Alright, this is a big deal. If nothing's actually wrong in and of itself, right? That no action is actually wrong. It's just about whether it conforms to society. Well then, evil is reduced to just a cultural perspective or basically preference. We don't like that. We like this. So this is good, but we don't like that, so we call that evil. But ultimately, it means that nothing is right either, because it's just a matter of nothing's actually right. Meaning, in and of itself, there's nothing that's right, and nothing would be evil. So nothing good, nothing evil. One group accepts torturing innocent children for fun. They think this is a positive thing to engage in. Well, another group abhors it and thinks that's terrible. One group thinks slavery is like a proper way to function in a society, and another one doesn't. Well, you can't say that this one's evil and that one's good, because it's just whatever conforms to the society. No view is superior to the other, is what this ends up playing out to. Hitler likes to kill people or exterminate a certain race. Mother Teresa likes to help people, but guess what? Neither one's better than the other. Now would be an appalling thing to say. But we carry it out and say, well, what does this look like? Well, that culture accepted it, so that was good. And this culture accepted that, so that's what was good. Well, so you're saying the Holocaust is, right, was just fine. The problem with the Holocaust was not that it was exterminating a race. The problem was they went outside the borders of Germany. If they just stayed in Germany, it would have been fine. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Right? And so the reason that we had to have a war and all that was because they left Germany. But if they just stayed there and exterminated whoever they want, then that's their right. They get to decide if that's what they want to. I'm going to articulate this because we got to say, is that what you're saying? No, I'm not saying that. Okay, then you're not a relativist. Stop. Okay. But if there's no objective standard, there's no actual evil, is what this I'm basically getting at with this. Racism, slavery are potentially morally acceptable, as well as intentionally executing an innocent person, or human sacrifice, or rape, or torturing infants, or pedophilia. They just go on. It's like, well, it's all potentially okay. If, well, we would never think that. Okay, we won't, but if somebody else did it, then it's okay for them. Fairly interesting. Or some other group thought it was okay. Next one. Relativism is self-refuting. There's a couple ways this happens. First, just to criticize the position of another society. In order to do that, a relativist must at the same time approve the action because it conforms to that society's collective agreement. So they have to say, well, that's their collective idea, that they agree on, therefore it's good. But I'm going to criticize it now because I don't like it. Well, as soon as you're criticizing it, you're contradicting yourself. We also have a quote here. If you go to the next slide, we'll come back. This one's long, so I put it up for you. But it's kind of, seeing it will help because you got to process this one a little bit. All right, if we take this starting point, everyone ought to follow the moral norms of his or her own culture. Okay, that's where we're starting. That's the cultural relativist position. But then the cultural relativism is making an absolute and universal moral claim. Okay, by claiming that we all ought to follow the norms of our culture, you're making an absolute and universal moral claim, namely that everyone is morally obligated to follow the moral norms of his or her own culture. If this moral norm is absolute and universal, then cultural relativism is false. If I have the obligation to follow my culture, that's outside of relativism. You're saying that's transcendent, that responsibility. That goes outside. That's an objective reality. But on the other hand, if this moral norm is not absolute and universal, then cultural relativism is still false. For in that case, I would not have the moral obligation to follow the norms of my culture. So if I'm not, here's the moral norms of your culture. Well, am I obligated to follow those morally or not? Yes. Okay, then that's objectivism. You just went outside of relativism. They say, okay, here's the moral norms of your culture. Am I obligated to follow it? No, you're not obligated to follow it because there is no obligations. Okay, then they don't matter. That doesn't matter at all. They don't have any obligation. This is just us making it up. And so the point being, in either case, is self-refuting. It doesn't work. Going back to the previous slide, a relative morality cannot be improved. There's a big problem. It's only possible to change a society, not to improve it. So to improve a society morally, there's got to be some standard you're getting closer to. You're attaining, like, oh, we were acting apart from the standard, or contrary to the standard, and now we're aligning with the standard. We're moving towards the standard. Okay, well, now we're improving in some way. But if there's no standard that's outside of the culture or the society itself, well then, how have you improved? You haven't. You've just changed. That's all that's happened. It's just different, but it's not better. But of course, what does everybody say about eradicating slavery? This made our society and our nation better. They don't say, well, it's just different. It was fine then, and now it's not. No, it wasn't fine then, and it's still not fine. Guess what you just became? Objectivists. You're saying, no, it's not about the view of the society. It transcends that. Morality is something that's a transcendent principle. But according to relativism, the removal of slavery was not an improvement. It's just a change. And the challenge would be, if you're going to, I know that you think it's an improvement, well, what was improved then? Going on to the next one. Moral reformers would actually be immoral. We have all these people that we have renowned for. We think very highly of because they've really made a significant impact on the world or on our culture in the moral category. Well, a moral reformer, because they're reforming things, what are they doing? They're acting in opposition to the standard of the society. But according to relativism, the standard is what should be accepted and what you ought to be operating on. Well, they're standing against that and saying this is insufficient. Interesting problem. So the work of reformers involves identifying a moral deficiency within a given society. They're saying this is deficient. How can it be deficient on relativism? Whatever we have is that's what the standard is. Whatever we have this agreement on. And here you come in saying, oh, this is deficient. There is no deficiency. But then you think of who are these people? We've got Martin Luther King, Jesus, Gandhi, people who actually took stance and might have paid a price for it, who we hold in high regard. Well, they didn't agree with the society. They took a stand against it. At best, they're just irrelevant. At worst, they're actually immoral because they took a stand against the moral norms of the culture. This is another problem that's making this whole idea of relativism not make any sense. You're saying, well, what does that even mean about these people? A quote about reformers here. This is from J.P. Moreland. He said, "For moral reformers, by definition, change a society's code by arguing it is somehow morally inadequate. If normative moral relativism is true, an act is right if and only if it is in the society's code. So the reformer is by definition immoral." By the definition provided by relativism. By that definition, you're like, well, they're actually immoral. We can go that far. This is sufficient reason for me to reject all this collection. Sufficient reason to reject moral relativism as a viable position regarding morality. Well, what are we left with? Subjectivism or objectivism? Now, subjectivism is just worse than relativism. Because now all of us get to decide rather than having at least agreement on something, a social contract of some sort. Now I just get to decide whatever I want, and so do you, and so does everybody, and it's a disaster. Because you can't even refer to anything as some kind of standard, even if it's a fake standard. It's not even a fake one. So I could go into that a lot, but that just gets to be more of a disaster. An example would be you're in a classroom, and Sarah wants to say, you're not allowed to cheat in my classroom. Not because cheating's wrong, not because we have some view about it that we share, because I say so, you're going to do that, you can do that somewhere else, but you're not doing it here because this is my class. And that's all you can say. When you go to recess, third graders, you can't hit each other, not because it's wrong, just because I say so in my, on our playground. We're not doing that here, but nothing wrong with it. You can't cheat. I mean, all these things, it's just a mess. I could spend a lot of time on that, but I just want to, I'll just say that for today, it's worse than what we just talked about. It's kind of an amplification of each of the ones we already had been discussing. The other option is objective morality. And that's to say the standard of morality exists separate from any individuals or group. It's something that transcends, it's independent of us. It's independent, and therefore we discover it rather than determine it. This is the key. On subjectivism and relativism, we are the determiners of the moral standards. Subjectivism, we do it as individuals. Relativism, we do it as a group, of some kind of group. Well, objective morality means it's independent. It's discovered, not determined. It's something that we are assessing, we're looking at, and we're thinking about it, and sometimes thinking about it very deeply, and trying to come to an understanding of, okay, what is the actual reality about right and wrong in this regard, or with this in this instance? And we say, no, I think that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't be happening. That's actually wrong. And you're saying, and it's wrong for who? For anyone in this given circumstance. So on the second bullet here, within any given circumstance, the morality of an action remains the same regardless of the view of any individual or group consensus. Regardless of what you think, the actual morality of it remains the same. Regardless of where you are and what culture you are in, regardless of what race you are, regardless of what time frame, it doesn't change, because if it's objective, it still has the same moral value in that circumstance. And so that would be what objective morality would be asserting and saying, okay, this is the case. And so anyone in this particular circumstance who acted this way would be acting wrong or wrongly, regardless of how they think or what culture. It doesn't matter. You're acting, that action is wrong in that circumstance. The last thing I'll say is this, there is one distinction between absolute morality and objective morality that I would make. Objective morality, I would say there's different circumstances, and based on the circumstance. In this given circumstance, this action was wrong. In another given circumstance, it might not be wrong, doing the same thing, but it's based on circumstance. That could happen, but there's an objective answer in the circumstance for anyone. Absolute moral, an absolute morality, it would mean there's never a circumstance in which that is okay, or would be acceptable. It would always, in any circumstance, be immoral. And that would be an absolute moral. So there's absolute morals and objective. Without to be absolute, it has to be objective. But if it's objective, it might not be absolute. If you follow that, because so objective would be circumstance. In this circumstance, there is no distinction on any based on the person. Anyone in that circumstance, this action is right or wrong. In another circumstance, it might be, no, it's not wrong. Example would be like lying. But if you're a prisoner of war and you lie to the enemies in the war, I wouldn't say, oh, that's immoral. Right? So you go, okay, well maybe there's a circumstance for this. So that's a quick example of that. An absolute morality issue. I mean, there's no circumstance ever within which that's acceptable. As Christians, do we think there's absolute morality? Definitely. Shall we say absolutely? If I'm in a discussion with someone who's a relativist, I'm not trying to get them to absolute morality, I'm trying to get them to see objective morality. And so that would be a tactic or a strategy that I'm going, okay, I want to get them to see this. And they're going to have to get to the point of like seeing God and who God is and what God's done and how He's created things to get to the absolute aspect of it. But the first step, I'm just trying to get to seeing them seeing the other side of this, and rather than relative morality, to see the objective morality. And I'll leave it there.